Hello and welcome everyone to Navigating Autism, Transforming Lives, the Essential Role of Assessments podcast. In this 3-part series, we'll speak to experts about the comprehensive role assessments can play in effective autism care. In our first episode, we focus on how occupational therapists, or OT, use assessments to work from a strength-based perspective that helps autistic children and adults to use their strengths to live their best lives. I'm joined today by Shelley Hughes, an OTR, Registered Occupational Therapist, and Director of Portfolio Management and Delivery for Pearson Clinical Assessment. Shelley, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Megan. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, absolutely looking forward to it as well. So just to jump right in, how has the role of OTs in autism care evolved?
That's a really, really good place to start. And I think we're all aware that the prevalence of autism has increased. And as that prevalence has increased, so has the recognition and the value of occupational therapists as integral members of the autism care team. We've evolved our approaches, we've evolved our strategies, and we've built a really strong evidence base as our understanding of autism has evolved and developed. So, for example, not so long ago, our focus may have been on addressing, let's say, something like basic motor and sensory needs. And this has evolved into a much more comprehensive and much more integrated and strength-based approach. So we're really working on supporting independence, social participation, mental health, and using evidence-based practice. So I think really the crux of it is that the holistic approach that an OT brings really helps individuals capitalise on their autistic qualities, and by helping them identify ways in which these qualities actually give them the edge over neurotypicals. So I think that's the way, the evolution that we've been through over the last couple of decades, I would say.
That's a really helpful context. Thank you for setting that up. So just to build on that then, would you be able to elaborate on the importance of an integrated approach to treatment?
Yeah, so I guess as I've already touched on, occupational therapists are very much core members of the autism care team. And as such, it's really, really important that we collaborate closely with other team members and with families and all of those working with the individuals that we're supporting. Whether that's at home, whether that's at school, whether it's in work or in a community setting. So it's really important that we collaborate to optimize outcomes. And in doing this, we need to liaise with different team members at different times and families and all of those supporting an individual to create a really coordinated plan. And that coordinated plan really should focus on equipping individuals and those around them with the strategies that they can draw on in their everyday lives. So they can draw on those as and when the opportunity arises. To give an example, and I like to give examples, so you'll probably hear quite a few examples from me here today. By helping a caregiver or parent understand the impacts of different sensory environments and understanding their own sensory preferences, and I'm not talking about the child here or the individual at the centre, I'm talking about those working around an individual. By understanding their own sensory preferences, we can equip them with the knowledge and the tools to support their autistic child or the adult they're supporting. And we can provide them with the tools to support them in participating in everyday activities. And the same goes for other environments, such as classrooms or work. So it's really important that we collaborate to be able to provide that sort of wraparound care and the tools that they can use themselves in everyday situations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. How would you say that the assessment tools for autism have changed? Are there more options for OTs who work with autistic populations now?
Oh, yes, most definitely. And as I said, as our understanding of autism has evolved, so have the tools that we use. So historically, we may have used what we term a bottom-up approach. And in a bottom-up approach, we're referring to using tools that focus on a particular skill area, such as, let's say, fine motor skills. But now we take a much more comprehensive top-down approach, placing a much stronger emphasis on understanding the individual in the context of their everyday environment. We're looking at the family impacts, the teacher perspectives, and identifying strengths and challenges across various areas, various domains. So in practice, the reality is we tend to use a combination of this top-down and bottom-up approach. What we're doing here is trying to take the big picture perspective, but then drilling down into the detail as and when needed to really help us understand how we can support a particular need. So, for example, if we're working with an autistic child who might have identified a personal goal of participating in soccer or football, as we might call it in the UK, but I'll refer to soccer here. They want to participate in soccer, but perhaps they're struggling to do so. we might use a top-down tool such as the PDCAT to understand the supports a caregiver provides in everyday situations or in everyday tasks. And from this, we may identify a high level of support needed around, let's say, social communication or sensory needs or even motor skills. And this might lead us to then choose to administer an assessment that really explores these areas in a little bit more depth. We might use something like the BOT3, as I refer to it, but that's, for those who are not familiar with it, that's the Brunick-Oseretsky test of motor proficiency. So BOT3 is a much more commonly used term. So they might use tools such as the BOT3 to assess motor performance, or a tool to help us unpick sensory needs in different environments, such as the sensory profile. So by using this combination of this sort of top-down and bottom-up approach of tools, we can get a fuller picture and tailor our support plan accordingly around the individual. I should also add here that we've also seen a lot of technological advances in recent years, and this has led to improvements in our assessment process as well. So, for example, the PDCAT that I just mentioned uses computer adaptive testing, and computer adaptive testing is a really good tool to reduce the burden on caregivers. So what it does is it has like an item bank of questions, but you don't answer all of those questions. You answer the questions that are targeted to that individual's optimum sort of needs, so to speak. So, that technology has allowed us to improve our assessment process. Also, many tools use online scoring, which reduces the burden on examiners. It already comes back to them scored and interpreted. So all of these improvements together, so improvements in the content and improvement in the delivery mechanisms, all have sort of helped improve or make assessment more personalised and more accurate and more effective, and ultimately improving the quality of care that we're able to provide. So there's lots of things that have changed and improved that really help us work with autistic populations.
That really is fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. So Shelley, in your opinion, your experience, what assessments would you say are the most useful to OTs in assessing autism?
This is a great question. Here I think of, this is my ideal OT toolkit. And this is, as an OT, it's like being a kid in a sweet shop, as we'd say in the UK, or a kid in a candy store, you might say. So there's lots of tools here, but I'm going to touch on some of the ones that I kind of would turn to, that I know are used most frequently. And these are the ones that I think really, really provide a lot of benefit and really help us as clinicians work with the individuals that we're working with. So as I've said already, from an OT perspective, we're very much focused on the individual's participation goals, and therefore we want to use assessments that would really help us identify these. And we also prefer to draw on a strengths-based perspective. So using tools that will help embrace this is really important. So thinking about that individual's participation goals and thinking about their individual strengths as well. So some of the most widely used tools that will really help support this. So I'll mention the first one is the Vineland Adaptive Behaviour Scales. And this is really, really widely used assessment in autism evaluation. It's particularly useful for measuring an individual's adaptive behaviours. So these adaptive behaviours are the practical, the everyday skills needed to function and live independently. And these scales are really helpful in identifying developmental delays and assessing the impact of autism on everyday functional tasks. So, it's a really important tool. It's really, really widely used for autism evaluations. The second one that I'll mention is the sensory profile too, and this is one of the most widely used tools for assessing sensory processing needs. It's, again, a key tool in an OT's toolkit. It helps understand how individuals respond to sensory information, things like light, touch, sound, taste, movement. And it looks at these and sort of explores them in the context of everyday activities. So again, it's bringing the sort of the strengths-based piece into it. Another tool that I'll mention, I've already mentioned this one, is the PDCAT. And the PDCAT, it's a little bit like the Vineland that I mentioned earlier. The PDCAT is an adaptive behaviour assessment as well. However, there's a fundamental difference with the PDCAT in that it provides an understanding of the extent to which an individual can self-manage daily activities and the support needs. So it looks at the scaffolding that an individual needs around them to be able to manage and those individual support needs. Another fundamental difference is that it has an autism-specific option, and that option tailors the content and the structure of the items or the questions to the needs of autistic populations as well. So there's a few fundamental differences. The other one is one I've already mentioned, which is that it has a computer adaptive element to it, or it is computer adaptive. again, you've got a shortened assessment to help you sort of look at all these everyday domains. Another one I'll mention is the school function assessment. This assessment has many similarities to the PDCAT, but the difference here is that it's focusing on the participation and supports in the school environment, so the scaffolding and the supports provided the child needs in the school environment. I would also say, along with the PDCAT, it has the added benefit of criterion reference scores. And criterion reference scores, if people are not familiar with those are scores where you're assessing the child, the individual, against their own baseline. And these are really good for tracking progress. You can use them for tracking change over time and progress. So both the PDCAT and the school function assessment have those as well. And I think the last area that I would mention that's really important is to think about motor assessments. Motor assessment really is a domain of interest for occupational therapists. And although the criteria for diagnosing autism spectrum disorder does not include motor assessment, we know that there's a really high prevalence of co-occurrence with conditions such as developmental coordination disorder and other sort of motor delays and needs. So OT practitioners are frequently using and including motor assessment as core to their initial assessment process and as core to their subsequent care planning. And assessments that we tend to use are the BOT3, which I mentioned already, or the Movement Assessment Battery for Children, or the Movement ABC3. And we do, for those who are interested in learning a little bit more about this, we have some excellent webinars on our website from experts in the field which explore this further. And I would urge you to go and listen to some of those, some really good research and evidence to support this need, I should say.
So you had mentioned at the start of that discussion just about assessments, really pulling on the strengths, focusing on that. So can I ask then, why is it important to focus on the strengths and not the deficits? And how can assessments help with that?
Yeah, I think there's something that's really important to me. And I think most of us would agree that we tend to avoid things we're not so good at. I certainly do. I'm not one to go and do something I don't enjoy. So that goes for all situations. It goes without saying that a child, if they're doing things that they're not so good at, they're perhaps not going to engage the best. So, conversely, if we focus on the things that we are good at and we're motivated to do, then we're naturally much more engaged. We get a confidence boost. We feel more empowered. As said already, it's core to occupational therapy practice. So we take a holistic approach to understanding a person and how they interact with the environment and how they engage in various occupations. And we use assessments as part of this approach. The assessments can help us identify a person's functional strengths across a real variety of areas. So, for example, an assessment may uncover strengths that are not immediately obvious. It may uncover things such as an individual has exceptional memory or an ability to thrive in a structured environment. So identifying these can help us define and understand and uncover opportunities to employ them in supporting the individual and enabling self-advocacy. So I think it goes without saying that strengths are really important to help us kind of on that care journey with the individuals we're working with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you so much for sharing. And if you're willing, I'd love it if you could share more about how a strengths-based approach can improve long-term outcomes.
Yeah, so I guess I've touched on this a little bit already. So what I would say is once we've identified an individual's strength, we can build on them to guide interventions, to set really meaningful goals and to empower those we're working with and the families that we're working with. So by focusing on what the individual can do well, OTs can help them set realistic and achievable goals. And that's really important. Goals need to be realistic and achievable. Otherwise, there's little or less value in them. So if we do this, we can use them to build confidence, to develop greater independence, and ultimately improve overall quality of life. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. It's about improving quality of life. To give one example, let's say we focus on strengths to support maybe a behaviour change that an individual has identified as a goal. If we use strengths to support this behaviour change, clients or the children we're working with are more likely to develop skills that are sustainable, that are relevant basically in their everyday lives. So focusing on what individuals can do rather than what they can't do, it really encourages gradual, manageable changes. And that's really important as well. It's about things being manageable. And if they're gradual and manageable, they're much easier to incorporate into daily routines. And if we can incorporate them into daily routines, then we usually lead to sustained and lasting progress. So that's, I think, really important. So it's about building them into those routines and getting that longer term progress.
Excellent. Thank you. Shelley, in your opinion, would you say that some assessments are especially effective for helping OTs to determine sensory needs?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I've touched on one of these already, the sensory profile too, and that's the obvious assessment that springs to mind, is a favourite of mine. And I think the sensory profile, and there's a family of assessments with the sensory profile family, these assessments really help gather information about an individual's sensory processing patterns. They gather information about preferences and challenges, and these can then be used to guide a real personalised intervention. Well, some people are aware of these, not everybody, but there's an aspect of the sensory profile called the Assessment and Planning Report, which is available on the digital administration. And the Assessment and Planning Report really helps tease apart where sensory processing needs are impacting or enhancing participation. And that's really the crux of what we're trying to understand, is how is sensory processing driving participation, but how is it also impacting participation? And the other benefit, and this is a real key benefit, is that it provides a framework for conversation. It helps individuals, caregivers and professionals understand how sensory processing is impacting participation, and it provides that shared understanding. I sometimes refer to it as that aha moment when we can sort of say, now I understand why such and such is struggling in that particular classroom environment. And now we have this shared language and shared tool around understanding this. We can all sort of communicate more effectively and understand how we can support individual needs. And that helps then create an environment and a routine that we can all implement to support those we're working with. So I think it's not only a tool for gathering information, but it's a tool for supporting conversation and dialogue as well.
I love that. Thank you so much. What would you say are some of the ways that an OT may personalize an intervention based on information about sensory processing needs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think an easy example could be, let's say we have a student who exhibits attention difficulties, but is also perhaps sensory seeking. We could allow that student to listen to music on headphones while completing work, and that can help them focus and use their unique sensory preferences to their advantage. And also, to build on an earlier point, by understanding an individual's sensory needs, we can help them be their own self-advocates by providing them and those around them with the knowledge and resources to empower or to make those adjustments in real time. I would also point people to sort of some of the work that Dr. Winnie Dunn has completed. Dr. Dunn is the author of the sensory profile, and she's undertaken a lot of work in exploring the benefits of coaching as an effective support strategy for sensory processing. So again, coaching caregivers and individuals in helping them to be their own advocates and make adjustments as and when needed. And as also just add on this, we can also use this information to help us collaborate with other professionals, and that then helps optimize and tailor those environmental supports. And so, for example, let's say in an educational setting, we can use this information to work with teachers and staff to implement sensory-friendly strategies that enhance the classroom environment or enhance learning and participation for an individual child we might be supporting. So this goes back to my first example, I guess, when we talk about the idea of headphones to help a student complete work. That's an example of a practical way we could implement that in a classroom situation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. How would you say OT complements other therapies in autism care?
OTs, as I've said already, really are core members of the care team, and there are many ways that OT complements other therapies. I've touched on a few of these already, but I think the main takeaway here is that no intervention should be provided in isolation. We're all part of a team, and all members bring their own unique perspective. And for OTs, that perspective is rooted in occupation, it's rooted in participation and supporting autistic individuals to engage meaningfully in contexts that are important to them. One way that this shows up practically in a team setting is that OTs are often well attuned to that environment, that context in which participation occurs. So we can suggest environmental adaptations that can be used across disciplines to support participation. So let's take, for example, a speech and language pathologist may be working with an individual or a group of individuals in a session. By understanding sensory needs, we can help the speech and language pathologist make adjustments to their environment to optimize that therapy session. So again, just working that collaboratively can then help the individuals get more out of their speech and language session, for example. So that's, just one example of how an OT can complement other therapies. And I think we are very much core members of that care team.
Incredible. Thank you. We are nearing the end of our time, but before we wrap up, Shelley, I'd like to ask if you could share some thoughts on how OTs can help reduce caregiver burden.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So this is a subject so close to my heart. I am the parent of a young adult who was diagnosed with autism at the age of 5. She's actually now 22. So I have a lot of lived experience at dealing with caregiver burden. And by caregiver burden, I'm not talking about any specific burdens that she brings. I'm actually referring to the burden that the system brings. And, as caregivers, our views, our experiences and our strengths are equally as important in supporting our loved ones. So we really have to, remember the caregiver's needs as core to supporting the individuals we're working with. And I've had several incidences in my time where my expertise, my time, my understanding, could have been more considered and could have been more thought out. And I'm sure many of us have been in situations like this as well. But I think it's really important we look at how we make it easy for a caregiver to provide their views. And it sounds really simple, but we fail at it quite often. There's many times where I've been asked, let's say, to complete a questionnaire by hand, which has been a lengthy process. And then I'm asked the same information again from someone else on the same team or an adjacent team. Or let's say I go to an in-person meeting and I might spend 2 hours traveling to get there and back, only to be there for 10 minutes. It's very frustrating. We have a lot of technology at our fingertips. I know not all of us can use technology, and I think this is where we have to meet families where they're at. But for me, I would prefer to complete a digital survey over a paper form. It's more convenient. I much prefer to use video conferencing where appropriate. But I also really, really, really love it when a professional who's working with my daughter can provide me with resources that I can easily share with others to support her. That goes a long way, and it just really does make a tremendous difference. Really, I think what I'm saying is I don't want to be doing the same tasks and repeating the same tasks. And in my experience in the 22 years, I'm quite often repeatedly doing the same tasks, and that is a big burden. So I think the takeaway really is just think about the things you can do to make it easy for the caregiver, and therefore easier for that individual you're supporting at the centre here. Have the best care plan in place with the least burden on everybody that needs to support that individual. And that goes a long, long, long way.
Excellent points and very well said. I do think that is the perfect note to end on here. So Shelley, thank you so much for your time and your insights for our audience. This really has been an enlightening conversation.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
And of course, thank you as well to our listeners. And we hope you learned some strategies to support children, families, and adults in their homes, school, and community. If you'd like to learn more about other great autism tools, you can visit Pearson's Autism Resource Center at pearsonassessments.com. Thank you again, and we hope you'll join us again soon on our next episode of Navigating Autism, Transforming Lives, the Essential Role of Assessments.